Alright, well, welcome. My name is Scott Williamson, or Mr. Williamson, as the students know me as. I am the 6th grade teacher. I am the last teacher, homeroom teacher, after me to go to logic school. So I have the privilege of being the culmination of Saxon in our school. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later, but just to give you an overview of what I'm going to talk to you about today is I'm going to talk about Saxon, how it's different from K through 3rd and 4th through 7th, the Saxon Method. I'm going to give you some advice, tips, and common problems. I'll open up for questions at the end so we can talk about it back and forth. But first of all, so let me get a feel for who everyone has. So like, what students do you have? What grade? 2nd and 4th?
2nd and 6th.
2nd and 6th?
5th grade.
5th grade?
1st and 3rd.
1st and 3rd?
4th.
4th?
5th.
5th?
Kindergarten.
Kindergarten.
3rd and 4th.
3rd and 4th?
Kindergarten.
Kindergarten. All right, so we got basically all the grades covered here. So some of this will apply to everyone. Something will apply to everyone in the room here. Let me get a feel for you personally. Have any of you ever dealt with Saxon before? Or is this new? You've dealt with Saxon, you've dealt with Saxon. What kind of math did you have when you were going through school? What kind of math are you familiar with? Does anyone want to share something? Or
I don't even know.
You don't remember?
Whatever the state school system had at the time. Long time ago.
So
That's what I could do.
So I was homeschooled. I grew up just about 10 miles southwest of here. And I was homeschooled my entire life. And I actually used Saxon myself from about algebra half, I think is when we started using it, through algebra 2. And so I have a history with Saxon myself. This is what I used when I was doing that. Before I used it back in math. And I have to say, I really jived with Saxon. That's one of the reasons why I've been asked to teach this course on Saxon Math. Is because I really like how Saxon does things, and it was really easy for me as a homeschooler to go through and do it. And I'll explain why that was here in a little bit. But let's dive into a little bit first about what is Saxon like. When your student comes into the classroom, when they bring assignments home, what can you expect? And I gave you a handout here that kind of gives you an overview of how things are going to look as I write them down in brief form. So grades 4 through 7 are like the books that you have here. This is what Saxon is most well known for. They're books like Saxon 5-7, I think is the book is called, onward. And we start that in about 4th grade. And these are what Saxon is most well known for is this format. And so at the beginning of each lesson, you have a warm-up. The teacher may or may not prescribe that. I usually don't. As I do more and more teaching, I realize that textbooks will always give you more material than you can use, which is great because you never want to run out of material. But we never use all of the material, and that is okay. Whenever you see a teacher not doing that, just realize the textbooks are created with more material than we can ever use. So I don't use the warm-up, except if I need to for something. Other teachers might, right? So each teacher will teach Saxon just a little bit different, keep that in mind. After the warm-up, you'll see that there is like a there's the lesson. And so this is the new concept that we will go over. And there will be different things. Here we have dividing by a decimal number. Now we've talked about dividing before, and we'll talk about the spiral method and how Saxon works. But each lesson will be something new, something different. And that is the lesson. Then you'll have the lesson practice. So the lesson practice, otherwise sometimes called the practice set, will be problems that are specifically pointed towards that new concept. And so most teachers will have focus on that, and then we'll make sure that we do those problems. And then after that, this is something that is very important to the Saxon Method, is also the mixed practice or the problem set. These are problems that one or two of them will probably reference the new concept, but the main purpose of this is repetition, and where they will go back and they will review all of the other concepts that they have talked about and build up onto up to that point. And they will continue that throughout the entire book. So you will never be done with decimals. You will never be done with fractions. You will never be done with percents. You will never be done with money in the younger grades or whatever concept they're working on. They will always be practicing that throughout the entire year. How do we handle the work? As I said, I can't finish all the problems in one day. That would be unreasonable for most students, not all. Some students can get through 30 practice problems and the lesson set and the practice set and read their lesson in an hour. Some of them can do that. And I encourage students to work as hard as they can. However, I only assign the odds number problem sets, and you'll see modifications like that with many other teachers. That they will only assign the practice set, or they only will assign the problem set, the first 5 of the problem set, or odd numbers, which is what I do. We also believe very much in grading our work, making sure that the students not only do the work, but they are held accountable for doing it well. So that means that each student, we expect them to look at the problems that they get wrong and fix them. How that happens in each classroom is a little bit different. In my classroom, I set aside Fridays because I don't have the opportunity to grade every day. I grade on Wednesdays and Fridays, and so I will basically take a week's worth of grading, hand it back to them on Friday, and that is part of their work, at-home work for that Friday, is to look through their corrections and say, oh, I didn't carry the 1, however it goes. But that is something that you can also be involved with as well as that correction problem. In my class, I require a co-teacher signature showing that they have completed it. Other classes will have different methods of doing that. Grades K through 3rd is a little bit different. So they have a new concept side. I tried to bold the important sections. They have, well, I should say they have a meeting part at the beginning, they have a new concept part, and then they have a worksheet. So what you will see coming home most of the time will be that worksheet. And how exactly the teacher wants you to complete that is up to them, but Saxon says that the first part is supposed to be guided practice. Guided practice is a word meaning that we're not expecting the student to know everything offhand like that with those. We're not saying, no, I can't help you, you have to do this on yourself because you're being evaluated on this. This is guided practice. This is also something which we would call formative assessment. The idea of formative assessment is that we are using an assessment, a graded paper, however your teacher decides to do it, to inform like, okay, I can see that they're not doing well on this, they are doing well on that, we need to teach this way. So we are trying to get them to learn through these assignments. The next side is something that they are supposed to do, the side B on their worksheets. You have a side A and side B on their worksheets. The side B is meant to be a little bit more of the review part, kind of like we have the problem set. The first part, side A, is kind of like a practice set of a new lesson, and you have a problem set, which is kind of a review. So they are supposed to do that a little bit more on their own, but obviously with the younger grades, we want them to learn. We want you to be a part of their learning process, so help them when they need help in a teacherly fashion. Don't just give them the answers, but help them try to see those answers. But how this is applied in each classroom is very different, so pay attention to how it goes. For example, I try to get through 5 lessons a week because we have a couple different, we have about 120 lessons in the Math 8-7 book. We do a test on them every 10 lessons, same with the K through 3rds. We do a test every 10 lessons where we evaluate them and try to get a snapshot of where they're at and where they're learning. Those tests are meant to be like more of their work, especially with the older grades. Like I would say, keep your hands off on those as much as you can. Let us see what their level really is. The younger grades, talk to the teachers, see what amount of help they want you to give them. But every 10 lessons is us evaluating where they're at with their math. They also have investigations. Obviously, in the younger grades, a lot of the assignments are going to be more hands-on. The upper grades, we have what we call investigations every 10 lessons, where we will do something like cut up paper and make fraction pies, do things like that. We'll draw circles with compasses and measure angles, something a little bit more hands-on. Younger grades, they will have more and more of those, especially in the K through third curriculum. So having manipulatives like money manipulatives may be useful at home as well for things like that. So pay attention to what the lessons are asking for and talk to your teacher about it as well. Trying to see if I covered like all of the bits and pieces of that. Did I miss anything? Okay, so that is the nuts and bolts. That is like the logistics of in and out of Saxon. Okay, any questions about that so far?
So the answer keys, have the teachers all have that uploaded?
All right.
Time?
Yes or no, it depends on the teacher. I have all the answer keys scanned in and I make that available on the Google document. However, I had to put in the effort and time to scan in an entire textbook to do that. Now, all teachers have access and abilities to do that, so I don't know what answer guides are available for other classes, especially the younger grades, because first of all, it's easier math, and I hope that that's a little bit more accessible. When you get up to my level of math, you know, sometimes doing pre-algebra stuff is difficult. You know, you have to read the lessons and look at it again. And I will have answer guides for my class 8-7. I don't know about the other classes. I don't know.
I think I'm just most concerned with the 6th grade.
So I have answer guides. The answer guides will be available. In fact, if you go into my 6th grade, the Google lesson plan, if you go to the far left column under my name, I have a co-teacher resource folder. I have linked the entire, like all of my resources, and in there's a math folder which has my answer guides in it. And I will create a PDF out of the particular pictures of each page for that week's, and I will post that into the grammar school lesson plan as well. So that is my process. Your mileage may vary in each classroom. I hope that there are answer guides available if you need them. I know that 5th grade has one because I was part of that and I scanned in that one as well because I taught that one 2 years ago. So I guess the one I don't know about is 4th grade would be if they have an answer guide now. So, but once again,
Do the books travel back and forth between school and home, or do they stay here?
Yes, books will travel back and forth between school and home. Those books in particular. Not all books travel back and forth, but those do. That would be determined by the teacher what textbooks need to go back and forth. For the younger kids, they have worksheets. They don't have a book. So teachers actually print out the worksheets and they will come in the homeroom with the binder. Do you know about the back and forth binder?
I might have heard of reference, but yeah.
So a key aspect of communication back and forth between home and school is a homework folder. What do we call it? The folder. Is there a special name for it? It's just the folder. The folder is where, like, on the left you will have things that need to be left at home, and on the right you have things that need to go right back to schools, the memory device. And so if there is like us communicating to you, we'll put something in the left-hand column that is meant to be left at home. The worksheets, for example, would be you do them and then you take them right back to school, so they're going to be on the right side of that folder that comes with a student.
Some of the grades, even like Malachi last year, Mrs. Helmick said, this is booked to stay home. So he didn't have to carry it, and then he had one in the classroom as well.
In rare occasions, we have enough textbooks where one can stay home. Like my science textbooks, I have enough where they can keep one at home. We don't always have that available. Okay, any other questions? Yes.
You mentioned the test and us staying hands off, so does that mean if the test falls on a day at home, then you will administer the test, or you try to schedule?
That,
again, teacher by teacher?
once again, teacher by teacher.
Okay.
Some teachers say like, yeah, I don't like to send tests home.
Okay.
At my level, the students are supposed to be a little bit more self-sufficient, so I feel
Right.
comfortable sending home a test saying like,
Okay.
you guys can sit down and do these 20 problems. There's no lessons you can read over. You should be able to handle the logistics of it. Younger grades, I don't know how that's going to work. That'll be case by case. But in that case, I would just talk to the teacher. Now, ideally, the test is an assessment that we call summative tests. We have summative and formative testing as the two main types of assessments that we categorize things as. Formative, like I said, is where you're trying to form the student, you're trying to inform how you're going to teach later on. Summative is more like, I need a snapshot of what they actually know. So we need to have as little interference or noise with what the student actually knows.
What grade are your kids in? Fifth will be Saxon, and grade as well.
Well, I know like for fifth grade, this is 100% all the assessments, and it's not like this big ordeal, you know.
Right.
It's just, you know,
I was
it's
just
just,
curious that if it fell on
sometimes it
day,
does.
they would send it home.
And it's usually an easier day, to be honest,
Yes.
because they just have just that to do, and then you can't give them the answer, you know, they just have to suck it up or they laundry or whatever.
So, but talk to the teacher if you have questions about that. I send my test home.
Okay, yeah, just curious.
If you
Yeah.
have new students like coming into school for the first time,
Yes.
do they do an assessment before to kind of figure out where they?
So this year we are doing a school-wide assessment. So for the grammars, are they doing it for the upper grades? I think they should be doing it at least for 7th grade. I don't know about 8th grade and above. But 7th grade and below, we are doing a school-wide assessment of their level. And so we are trying to make sure that we have everyone correctly placed and we don't wait halfway through the year, which unfortunately, the reason why we're doing it school-wide is because we had that issue with a couple of students last year where we started teaching them, but like, it's actually really hard to know like what a student knows, especially if they're coming in for a different curriculum. Because I had one student who was coming in from a different school, and they did really poorly at the beginning of the year. They worked really hard, and they were able to get their grade up to a passable level. Not excelling, but passable level. Love the student, great student. I had another student who came in from another school, started at about the same spot, just removed. And so that couldn't tell you that she wasn't progressing until later on in the year, and it was too late to switch classes, and it wasn't great for that student. Not a good experience. So we're trying to avoid that this year by maybe doing some shifting of students this year. So even if your student is in 3rd grade, they may not be staying in the 3rd grade classroom for math. Maybe going up. Like I said, I had 5th graders in my class with 7th graders, so.
And just so everybody knows, just if you are new and you get moved down the grade for math, you're really not moving down
Yeah.
because the grade you're in now is actually above grade level, so don't ever feel like, you know, guilty or disappointed that your child's below because they're really
If they
not.
don't do that, they're not going to learn. They're going to start at the level where they're at.
Right.
before they
Yeah.
go up.
And it's
You don't
very
want
common,
frustration.
it's totally fine, you know.
So just a comment about like the weird naming conventions of the Saxon book. So you have Saxon 8-7. And so basically what they're saying is that if you are an advanced 7th grader, could be using this book. This is intended for like about 8th grade level math. And so you can see that like we are actually like teaching that basically a grade ahead of where other schools might be teaching that. And this gives us the ability to move students around because we have this format. So we're not set in stone that 6th graders need to be at this level. We're going to push them really hard to get there. We're going to teach them at the level that they're at. But we do believe in scholastic rigor. We do believe in pushing the student as hard as they are able to be pushed. We don't want them to be bored. You have 2 levels when you're teaching. You have boredom and you have frustration. We don't want either one. We want to be in that flow state in the middle. Okay, any other questions about the logistics? Okay, let's move on then to the Saxon Method. All right, so Saxon Method. Why do we use Saxon? How does this fit into our classical education style? And how does it work? I just realized that my clock is done. Switch that battery. Okay. It is now 11:10. All right, got it. So, Saxon Method. All right, so first I have to give you some background on how do we learn. All right? I teach a beginning logic class, and part of that is I've been trying to teach students of how to learn. That's one of our classical things, is that we want to give them the tools for learning. We want to teach them to learn how to learn. We believe that Saxon does that, and let me explain how it does that. So the basis of learning is basically pattern recognition, right? You see something over and over and over again, and every time you see something, you get a stimulus of either true or false. I see this problem, I did an answer, is that answer true or false? And if it's false, then okay, you go back and reevaluate how I process that. And so you learn by seeing that over and over and over again. I'm sure you know, as with children, you can't simply tell them something once, pick up your room, make sure to take your dishes off the table when you're done eating. That doesn't work. You have to tell them things over and over and over again. And that is part of the learning process. That is pattern recognition. And so Saxon does that. And by doing it over and over again, you are increasing the strength and variety of neural connections through repetition. Repetition is very emphasized in Saxon. What do I mean by increasing neural strength and variety? So the way that the way I've heard learning explained is that you have a concept, okay? And so every time you have you over here, and you want to access that concept, you have to travel on a road. You have to go there, and you have to go back. All right? So if I came here and I want to recall how to add things together, if I want to recall mixed numbers, I have to go and find this piece of information and bring it back. So our goal is twofold. Well, threefold. We want to increase this. The more times we travel this road, the bigger the road becomes and the stronger their connection to it becomes. The more that we can increase the size of this concept, the easier it is to find it. And also, thirdly, we need to be able to find this through other paths as well. So things connect to each other. So we're going to create other concepts, and we are going to connect it to other concepts. And we want to increase the strength of these connections as well. Okay? So that is how a quick view of how learning works, is we want to connect that. I call it, my students, I call it making boxes. You make boxes and you're going to put things into it. But what we do with Saxon is called a spiral method. We don't simply teach a lesson, a concept, and make it bigger and bigger and bigger and try to do this. Where Saxon tries to do is we try to create these ancillary points and create connections outside so that we can find that concept not only by this one path but by multiple paths. And so this allows students who have problems with, let's use mixed numbers for example. They just don't get how to add mixed numbers and multiply mixed numbers. They keep mixing them up because there's two different processes to do that. However, if we start talking about improper fractions rather than mixed numbers, that is a different concept. And they get improper fractions for whatever reason. I don't know. Students are weird. And so, but that creates another pathway to mixed numbers because they're related concepts. And so we have another way to get to this path, and all of a sudden, hey, look, I can make a circle. I can get to that idea. So Saxon does this. It's called a spiral method, where they will teach an idea. They'll teach an idea once, then they'll teach an idea twice, then they'll teach an idea 3 times, but they're always going to be adding a little bit more to it. So for example, fractions. You can start off with fractions, and you can have improper fractions, mixed numbers. You can add them, you can multiply them, you can divide them, you can convert them to decimals, you can convert them to percentages. There's all these different ways that you can attack an idea, and that is called a spiral method. All right? So as you can see, like I brought in decimal numbers, I brought in percentages when we're teaching fractions. Those things are connected ideas. We want to show those connections. And so that is the idea of the spiral method. A spiral method is where, I think did I write down a definition here for myself? So Saxon defines the spiral method as incremental development and continual review. So the big takeaway here is that if your student gets to fractions, for example, and they don't get it, don't panic. We will come back to fractions again. If they don't get it repeatedly, yes, that should be addressed. But but this requires us to stay on top of that as well. So I encourage you to keep it involved with your students' corrections. Yes?
Do you think this method helps kind of address learning loss, since you're not leaving one concept behind?
Yes, I personally do. So, repetition is the basis of learning. I have a mantra that I tell my class. If you really want to learn something, you need to do it every day for a week for a month, every month for a year, every year for the rest of your life. That is, I forget, I read it in a book, it's not the version to me. But, and it's not true in every circumstance, but it's a good mantra to live by. And so when we do things like Saxon, we are repeating it over and over and over again. And for example, like the first lessons in these books are going to be repeating a lot of the lessons from the previous book. When I started teaching 8-7 rather than 6-7 Saxon, 90% of the book is actually the same. About 90%. But that 10% can really throw you off because, once again, we don't want rote learning. We want to vary our pathways. For example, your history timeline is an example of this. So the kids will learn a history timeline throughout the year where they have a mantra and they will go through this chant that they do. However, I've noticed in my class, if I take that concept out of that context and put it into a different context, for some reason the connection isn't made because we have not created these other branches. We have not created those other stimulus. Those dates don't mean anything in any other context. And so when I say, okay, when did the Israelites, when was the Exodus? When did the Israelites leave Egypt? There's an actual date that we attached to this. Now, is the correct date? I think it's pretty close, but we can argue that. 1446 is the date that we use for that. But they oftentimes don't recall that right away. And so the same thing happens with math. And so we want them to repeat it, we want to repeat it in many different ways. Okay, so I already touched on grading a little bit. Especially the higher grades, this is how we do it. We have 60% of their grade is summative, 40% is formative, meaning that those tests that they are taking are 60% of their grade in my class. The lessons that they do are the formative part of their grading. So those 10 lessons that they do are 40% of their grade. That one test that they do is 60% of their grade. Because we weight the summative more because we view that as an actual representation of their ability, whereas the formative, we know that there's interference in that, right? It may not be just the student's ability. You also have me teaching. I'm telling them the answers. I'm not making them come up with every answer. If they have a problem in my classroom, I'm going to work with them until they get the right answer. I'm not just going to say, well, you didn't get it, you'll do it during corrections. No, I don't do that. I want them to learn. So, that is a little bit about the grading.